So I am Beth McKinley. My pronouns are she, her, and this is my partner, Scott McKinley, he, him. And I'm really looking forward to this presentation tonight. I heard Julie present with For Our Kids. She did a similar presentation, and I just thought, oh, we have to invite Julie, and Environmental Defense, and Alex is here to speak to us about climate aligned financing. And what I loved about the presentation that Julie did a couple of months ago was she didn't have any financial knowledge or understanding, which is really good. So she's going to really clearly explain the importance of financial regulation and how it affects climate as a solution. But before we jump into that, we're going to throw things over to you for a moment.
Yes, so we want you to answer a question related to tonight's topic. And that question is, what is the first word that pops into your head when you hear the phrase climate aligned finance? And so we're going to ask you to put that idea on the chat, and Beth's going to collect those words and make a word cloud out of that. So question again is right there in the chat. First word that pops into your head when you hear climate aligned financing. So go ahead, everybody, and find a chat and start typing away in there. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Okay, well, people are finishing that up. Just a little bit about For Our Grandchildren, particularly for the people that haven't attended one of these meets before. 4RG is a climate action group based out of Peterborough, Nova-Gimwanon, and our mission is to engage and mobilize people to effective action in response to the climate crisis. So 4RG has several pretty active committees, and we're always looking for more volunteers to help us out, and in a couple of cases maybe take a little bit more of a management role. So yeah, if you're looking to get a little busier and a little more involved, we could use you. And so you can go to the website to learn more about that. We also have a newsletter, Facebook page, a Facebook group, and an Instagram account. I mean, if you go to the website itself, it has most of the links there as well. So it's 4ourgrandchildren.ca. So at this point, though, we're going to ask John Woodger, who's a member of the Communications Committee. He's going to offer us a land acknowledgement. So, John.
Okay. We respectfully acknowledge that Peterborough is located on the Treaty 20 Michi-Saugig territory and in the traditional territory of the Michi-Saugig and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations, which include Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog, Ramapo-Soleil, and Georgina Island First Nations. For Our Grandchildren respectfully acknowledges that the Williams Treaties First Nations are the stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come.
Okay, so we hold online meetings here at 4RGMeets, For Our Grandchildren's meetings, 5 times a year. For those of you who are regulars, you will notice that this is a change from our previous monthly schedule. So we've decided to reduce that from 10 meetings in a year to 5, and that may create some space for more in-person events. We have recordings of all of our past presentations on the For Our Grandchildren website.
So we're pretty close to hearing from our presenters today. But before we do that, we've put together a bit of a poll for you in cooperation with our presenters. So I'm going to launch that right now. Okay, so what did we get? To what extent are you familiar with climate aligned financial regulation? Not at all was the most common answer. So over half of you are not really sure what that is. So we've got a lot to learn tonight, and that's excellent. That's what we're aiming for. How highly would you rank financial regulation as a climate solution?
It's a 3-way split.
Yeah, it kind of is. 1, 2, or 3 got the most answers, with one edging it. So you've got faith in our presenters that they're going to show you how it does relate.
And number 1 was what?
1 was the highest rank.
That they have a lot of faith in.
That it will make a difference.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Now, who should be responsible for aligning finance with climate? Is it the financial institutions themselves, the government putting down regulation, or is it individuals? And yeah, 85% of you are saying that's the government's position to do that, and so that's where regulation comes in. And I'm sure we're going to hear a great deal about those topics in our conversation this evening.
Okay, so before we move on to beginning our presentation, I'll show you that word cloud that I created. Okay, so if you've not used a word cloud before, basically, we asked you for 1 or 2 words that represents your understanding of climate aligned financing, what that meant for you. So you can see ethical. People here understand that it has something to do with ethics of investments. Government, divestment, economy, don't know was a common answer. Some of these words got split. Rosa Galvez, we'll hear about who she is. I think she's the senator who's proposing this bill that we'll learn about today. Indigenous, because part of this is Indigenous rights, respecting Indigenous rights and having policies that institutions have to respect when it comes to how they invest.
Okay, so we are pleased to welcome Julie Segal, and she, her are the pronouns, works as a senior manager of climate finance at Environmental Defence Canada, where she advances climate-related financial policy and regulation. She previously managed a portfolio of impact investments at the McConnell Foundation. Julie's career combines substantial finance and climate advocacy. Her work has been recognized with national and global awards for integrating environmental justice into sustainable finance, including winning first prize paper in the Ethics and Trust in Finance Global Prize. Julie writes about climate finance in the media, volunteers with community and youth-led environmental groups, and advises foundations on strategies for impact investing. She is a visiting fellow at the London School of Economics, Grantham Research Institute on Sustainable Finance, and the Just Transition. Julie completed a Bachelor of Commerce at McGill University.
We're also very pleased to welcome Alex Walker, them. They work as Program Manager, Climate Finance at Environmental Defence Canada, where they generate public understanding and support for financial regulation as a vital climate solution. They have worked with several environmental organizations, including, I love the name of this, I hadn't heard of it before, an environmental organization called Shake Up the Establishment. Isn't that great? So they've worked with Shake Up the Establishment, the Toronto Climate Action Network, the Kindling Trust. They have a master's in environmental studies from York University with a focus on climate change and social change. And they have undertaken award-winning research on queer and transgender issues of climate justice, as well as environmental social movements in the UK. So we will pass this over to Alex and Julie.
Thanks, folks. I'm going to start off with the presentation, but Alex, maybe if you want to just say a quick hi and wave so people can know your face also.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Lovely to meet you. Excited to be here with you all today. And yeah, I'll be kind of chiming in at the end of the presentation. And yes, I am British, before you ask.
Thanks, Alex. And thanks so much, Scott and Beth, for inviting us to do this presentation, and to everyone here. We have a presentation, which I'll share with you, and then we'll get straight into it. I'm super glad that we were able to start off with some opportunities for all of you to participate as well. So we got to know a bit about each of you quietly through your word cloud and polling submissions. And I think the answers that were shared on the poll about how familiar or lack of you are with climate finance is the absolute perfect place to start for this presentation. So I'll start by recognizing that I am based in Toronto on what's traditionally the Mississauga, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat territories. And now we can dive into this presentation on climate-aligned finance and policy. So climate, finance, and policy are often 3 terms that people don't think to put together. By the end of this conversation, hopefully you'll see those as a natural phrase: climate-aligned finance and policy all coming together. What we will talk about here, what does climate have to do with finance? What does the environment have to do with the money that we have and we invest? What does that have to do with people and us and our potential investments? What does all of that have to do with policy? And then at the end, Alex will come in and share what can we do, what can you do? So let's start off with that first question. What does climate change have to do with finance? There's kind of a circular relationship between climate change and finance. Climate change affects our financial systems, but most importantly, what we're going to start off with is that finance has an impact on climate change. Our current economic system and financial practices are in fact holding us back from maintaining a safe climate. I'll just lay the ground here. I mean, I'm sure everyone here involved in a amazing collaboration of grandparents working on climate are familiar with the urgency of climate change and some of the science behind why we're experiencing these damages. But it's always helpful to just bring our minds into the same place. So this past year, I think, was the year where the devastation of climate change very much came home to people living in Canada. It was the worst wildfire year on record in 2023. Over 40% of people were directly affected by wildfires. I'm sure many of us remember, depending on where we live in the country, either direct experiences or even just having wildfire smoke. Now, many of us in Eastern Canada are seeing the first snow of winter in, what's essentially mid-January. So climate change is evidently happening. We also know that the majority of climate warming pollution is caused by fossil fuels. So that's really the core of the problem. Over 80% of the gases, of the gases in the atmosphere that are causing our planet to warm disproportionately come from the burning of oil, gas, and coal. So that's the problem which we can fix and address and stop. And I mentioned what we're feeling here in Canada, but globally, climate change is causing such greater devastation. And we know that we're, just shy of too late to stop, real devastation from happening. To do that, we need a whole host of economic, social policy changes to make sure that we can confront climate change urgently and save the people and places that we love and care about from further devastation. One piece that we're talking about here today hasn't yet received as much focus. Like I talked about, we know fossil fuels are the cause of climate change. And what we now need to discuss is, how does oil, gas, and coal continue to get produced? How is it financed, essentially? Banks and pension plans, which are in many ways representing us, are in fact providing money to these oil, gas, and coal projects to continue polluting our airs, our waters, and our land. Investments really shape the economy. So if you think about it, if you're investing in a building, that building's going to be around for decades. The money, where we put money today, decides what our economy and infrastructure looks like tomorrow and what our climate looks like tomorrow. So we need money into climate solutions instead of into pollution and the climate problem. Right now, evidently, as I've discussed, the global financial system is failing people and planet. The largest banks globally, in fact, have invested over $5 trillion into fossil fuels since the landmark agreement on climate change was signed, known as the Paris Agreement, between over 200 countries in 2015. So in those past 7-8 years, financial institutions, banks, pension funds have continued to put money into what we all knew was the problem causing this devastation for us. And I should mention, I can't really monitor the chat as I'm presenting. So if anybody has questions that are worth interrupting, I'll trust either the people or our moderators to do that. So this is the impact of finance on climate change. Like I said, there's a bit of a circular relationship here, though, where climate change also impacts finance. So everyone here cares about climate change, about mitigating it, creating a safer world for your grandchildren. And that motivation is perfect. At the same time, some people are motivated by economic interests more so than other arguments. And the case there is really strong too for ensuring that we move money out of climate pollution and into climate solutions. So climate change will have an effect, a very negative effect on our financial and economic systems. Over $100 billion of assets in Canada are at risk of essentially nosediving in value as climate change progresses. So these are investments that are being put in, let's say, the old polluting economy, or in investments that are going to be damaged by the physical climate damage. And this is a very significant hit to economic stability in Canada if our banks and pension funds continue to move too slowly on the climate transition like they currently are. Canada's main financial regulator even recognized this in what was, what I consider to be quite a seminal statement. The main federal financial regulator put out a statement saying, delaying climate policy action increases the overall economic impacts and risk to financial stability. So every single sign, whether you care about planetary boundaries or economic stability, or maybe a mix of both, all signs point to us needing to take climate action very quickly on all fronts, and considering finance and the economy. Now, let's look specifically in Canada. I talked about how banks and pension funds have continued to fund climate pollution in the years since the landmark climate agreement known as the Paris Agreement. Canada and our banks are some of the worst offenders, regrettably. So when it comes to banks specifically, and often to take a step back when I'm saying financial institutions, I try and break that down, but that generally includes the banks who we keep our money with, the pensions who are managing our retirement savings, and the insurers who work to financially protect different types of infrastructure and projects, and a whole whack of others, but those are the main ones. So when it comes to Canadian banks, we're some of the largest financiers of fossil fuels globally. This is our big five banks, and Royal Bank of Canada was recognized with a not very celebratory title of being the #1 biggest fossil fuel financier in 2022. So if we think about that, Canada doesn't have the largest population, and one of our banks was investing more in fossil fuels than American banks, than banks from anywhere else in the world. It shows how disproportionately our financial system is over-invested in types of projects that make climate change worse. This isn't only true for our banks. Many Canadian pensions have made public commitments to reduce the emissions from their investments. So these are known as net zero commitments, let's say, where they're promising that they will reduce their greenhouse gas pollutions to zero or relatively close. So they've made those commitments, but many of them are not yet taking the necessary action. All of this points to one of the questions we had in the poll, which is who should be responsible for aligning finance with climate? Many people did say financial institutions should be responsible. An overwhelming amount said that government should be responsible. And I lean towards that second answer, because what we've seen is financial institutions, whether or not they have the responsibility, have not been moving quickly enough to do what needs to be done. And that's despite significant pressure from the individuals who bank with them or who are pension beneficiaries. Simply not enough has been done voluntarily from these institutions, which is why the work that Alex and I do really digs into the policy and regulation side. And as I opened up with, brings those three words of climate, finance, and policy all together. And the way this fits into the general climate picture in Canada, Canada is one of the largest historical emitters globally. If you add up all of our emissions since the Industrial Revolution, we're one of the only, of the wealthier G7 countries where emissions continue to grow. Most others have started to peak and decline. Canada is off track from meeting our environmental commitments. We're off track from doing what's necessary to keep a safe environment and climate for people who live here and around the world. And a big reason for that is our continued oil and gas production and a lack of rules or guardrails for the financial institutions who encourage and allow that to happen. So what we need are new rules that ensure financial institutions are taking the climate action that we all know is necessary. Taking a step back, what does climate finance, now that we understand hopefully a bit more about what that means, what does that have to do with people? So at the end of the day, financial institutions are pretty deliberately opaque. As Scott mentioned in my bio, I did used to work in finance, and a lot of that is, as I said, deliberately opaque, where it kind of makes it harder for the customer or an individual to feel comfortable engaging with this. But finance is really not so scary. At the end of the day, finance, banks, and pension funds are a service industry, right? We as people who have bank accounts or who are beneficiaries of a pension are their clients, essentially. So they're supposed to be a service industry. Is our bank and pension fund helping or hindering climate action? Are they cutting emissions or investing in companies that are increasing emissions? As we saw, Canadian banks are disproportionately investing in climate emissions, and pension funds are not yet on the right track either. I think a really important thing as well, when we, that's the individual level, but if we look at the systemic level, we know that when financial sector goes rogue, it creates some pretty uncomfortable living conditions for people all across society, right? If we think about the 2008-2009 financial crisis, that was devastating for most people, and not because of the individual's actions, but because financial institutions were taking risks that were disproportionate, that were not thinking of their end clients and the way that they affect the global system. And the government, the politicians in control, had not set rules to ensure that proper guardrails would keep those financial institutions from hurting people. Instead of another 2008 financial crisis for climate, we need new policy. So your power is both as a client of your bank and your pension, but even bigger as a citizen. And let's get into that second piece. What does climate finance have to do with policy? As I mentioned, you do have influence on your bank and pension fund as an individual, but there's kind of two options here. Either we can all engage as individuals and kind of play whack-a-mole with financial institutions, where we say, okay, we've gotten this bank to be slightly better, now let's get that pension to be slightly better. And you're continuously trying to get, to whack them all on that game, where you're continuously trying to fight these large institutions to go further. Or option two, we can fix the whole system instead of racing to improve each institution independently. If we change the rules of the game, then we're able to improve the way our financial institutions are using our money, and creating conditions where they're investing in a way that's actually good for the planet, for your children, grandchildren, and all of that. The rules of a financial system exist for a reason. As we've discussed, the voluntary commitments from banks and pensions have not led to action. And frankly, when we look at the way the financial system is regulated, or the policy in the financial system right now, banks and pension funds aren't doing anything wrong by investing in a future that is entirely unlivable. They're not breaking any rules other than moral ones. So we need to change that. The outcome is to ensure that policy, just like we now have policy for consumer protection, to ensure that the bank is holding enough money versus their investments, or your pension fund is keeping the right balance between what they're investing and what they owe us. We need new rules to align the financial sector with limiting warming to safest levels, which is 1.5 degrees Celsius. As you can guess at this point, Canada is recognized internationally as a low regulation jurisdiction, according to United Nations affiliated group. So our federal government is way behind the 8 ball on moving forward with climate finance policy. Like I said, finance isn't intimidating. Also, climate finance policy is very doable. Environmental Defense, our organization, along with a few other partners, published a roadmap to a sustainable financial system in Canada, outlining all of the policies that the federal government can take to fix this current problem and this current gap in their climate plan. Similarly, there is some leadership that we're really excited about within government. Someone put Rosa Galvez into the word cloud. She is an independent senator from Quebec who introduced the Climate Aligned Finance Act in the Senate. So let me tell you a bit more about these two solutions. We spent a good amount of time talking about why there's a problem, what it is, and now we're into the solution side about the momentum we can continue pushing in Canada. So hopefully your favorite part. Now we're getting into a bit of government stuff by dividing into the Senate and the House. So these are kind of the two different lanes of Canadian policy, which I'm sure many of you know very well. In the Senate is where the Climate Aligned Finance Act exists. This was introduced, as I mentioned, by Senator Rosa Galvez. We've worked very closely with her. I had the pleasure of advising on some of the specific policies in that, and we've worked alongside over 150 different climate expert organizations and academics to endorse this really world-leading piece of legislation that's currently working its way through the Senate. It is now at the Senate. I won't get too into the details here, but it's now, moving forward to the next stages of being studied in the Senate. And it's really recognized worldwide as quite a leading policy. What's important for me to name here is that Senator Rosa Galvez is an independent senator, so it's not entirely consistent with what we're seeing in the other side of government, which is the House. So in the House, this is where our members of Parliament are. So, of course, we all have our MP, and nearly 20 members of government have called for action for policies like the Climate Aligned Finance Act, which we lovingly term CAFA, for policies like that to move forward. And this is a bit of a preview for what Alex will talk about, how we can get involved. Just like I said, banks and pension funds are technically service industries. Our members of Parliament are supposed to listen to us also. So a bit more details. This is the roadmap I talked about, which can be a useful reference if you choose to engage with your member of Parliament. It kind of outlines exactly the policies that are needed to shift the system towards a safe climate. And we also have a video, which I'll play in a second, which isn't showing up here, where Senator Rosa Galvez joined us for an interview where she speaks a bit about the Climate Aligned Finance Act to share some more details there.
It is in 6 actions. One first action is to declare that these financial entities have a superseding duty to align with our climate commitments, that they need to plan using science-based targets in a calendar, in a given technology. We are technology agnostic. We are not saying use this technology because we know that Canada is vast and Canada has different sources for energy. They'll have to choose their path, but they have to align with the climate commitments. We want the boards where financial decisions are taken, where right now at present they are facilitating and financing greenhouse gas emissions. We want them to change. How? By bringing expertise of climate change into these boards and by eliminating conflict of interest. We also want that the regulators put in place guidelines that tells all these entities what does it mean to be aligned with the climate commitments and give more detail on if they want to do it through a taxonomy, well, let it be. And finally, to ask the government to report on the progress and to tell us how much we are reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and how much flow is going towards the transition, in order to have at the end the real accountability that everybody, and especially the financial sector in Canada, must assume responsibly with respect to the damage they are causing by fueling the climate crisis.
Super. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so before I pass back to Alex, we talked a bit about, again, what's climate finance? What are some of the solutions that are currently being discussed, both at the individual, but as we think more importantly at the systemic and policy level. And so to wrap up on the Climate Aligned Finance Act, which is a key piece we've been supporting, and which has been driving forward progress in Canada. As I mentioned, that has been moving forward in the Senate. There were also, as Alex kindly shared the link to in chat, over nearly 20 members of Parliament who have officially supported a similar piece of direction in the House of Commons, where the government should be using all of its tools to move towards climate aligned finance. But then outside of those, nearly 20 champion individuals, as well, 3 opposition parties in the House of Commons have explicitly shown their support for the Climate Aligned Finance Act. So the New Democratic Party, the Greens, and the Bloc Québécois have all said that have all encouraged formally the Liberal government to move forward with this, which they all shared during a joint press conference. So that was some really interesting momentum that we're starting to see and need to continue to build on. With that in mind, I'll pass it over to you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Julie, and hopefully that's given you a very clear introduction and overview of why this is such an important issue. So just before I touch on the things that you can do to help, I'm just going to leave you with a couple final tidbits of information, just to hopefully leave you with the impression that financial regulation is really what is needed here to bring the financial sector in line with climate goals, but to a larger extent, social goals as well. So we all understand that the financial system needs to make money to grow our pensions, to put interest in our bank accounts. It's important that the system works, the system makes money. It's important for all of us. The problem arises, as Julie demonstrated in the context of climate change. The problem arises when the short-term pursuit of profit harms the long-term needs of people and planet. So in an ideal world, we would have a financial system that can make money without harming people in the process, but that's not quite what's going on here. What we're seeing in Canada is a financial system that kind of lacks transparency and lacks accountability. And I'm just going to give you a couple of final examples about that to leave you with. So if we just look first of all to who's earning a lot of money in this financial system, well, we can go right to the top and we can look to our financial CEOs and our oil and gas CEOs. So in 2022, Brad Corson, who is the CEO of Imperial Oil, he made $17.3 million. Rory Gorey from Manulife Financial Corporation made $17 million. David McKay, our award-winning RBC fossil fuel financer, he made $16.3 million in 2022. This is all very, very high numbers. And it's important to remember that executive CEO pay is tied to the performance of a company. And we know that all of these companies I've just listed, they're all profiting from contributing to the climate crisis, from their huge contributions to funding to fossil fuel, basically. So it's pretty wild when you think about how there are some people profiting so heavily from causing the climate crisis. It doesn't feel great to me. Kind of gets worse when there's some research that came out from the Center for Policy Alternatives that for every dollar of inflation in 2022, 25 cents of that inflation went to oil and gas profits. So it's pretty, thinking back to being in the grocery store, agonizing about, can you afford eggs this time, while 25 cents of that inflation is going to someone causing the climate crisis. So money is clearly not moving in a way that is working for everyone right now. And that doesn't just relate to fossil fuels. There is a lot of things in Canada's financial institution that are pursuing profit over people. So just to continue on climate change for 1 second there actually, is home insurance costs. They are rising at roughly 3 times the rate of inflation due to more and more extreme weather events happening. And if you're in Alberta, that your home insurance rates have risen by 140% between 2011 and 2021. So, we're getting poorer because of climate change, and some people are making an awful lot of money about this, and financial regulation is a key thing that can help us address this. But beyond climate, there's a whole wealth of financialization that's happening in Canada's economy that is neither transparent nor accountable. And I think this kind of gives us the impression that the government needs to step in here. So I don't know if folks have heard of real estate investment trusts. These are big finance companies that buy up huge quantities of residential housing and they rent it out as institutional landlords. And there are countless stories of these companies putting profit over people. So one company called CAP REIT, they left 416 homes without water for 6 days over the Christmas period, just a couple of weeks ago in New Brunswick. And this is happening all across the country. The Public Sector Investment Board, who are huge fossil fuel financiers, they entirely own a company called Rivera Incorporated. Rivera Incorporated are a senior living, retirement, long-term care facility organization. And you may have heard of them because in 2019, there were 85 active lawsuits against them for neglect of residents. They also hit headlines in 2020 because there was such a high number of COVID-19 related deaths in their facility. And this is a company entirely owned by the people managing public sector pensions. So there's just so many strange things happening in Canada's financial sector that it's really important to know about. Climate change is such a big one, but you know, the buck doesn't just stop there. So what's increasingly happening is the profiteering from things that should be public, be that housing, healthcare, and a livable environment and a safe future. So it's so important that, you know, people can make money without contributing to climate change, without harming these public goods. And, you know, financial regulation, we think it is the absolute core of how we address this. So this takes us on, to the next slide, absolutely. So a lot of people want to engage with their own financial institution and they want to be part of divestment movements. So this is all very important, and it's important to think about your own finances. But we think that the most important thing you can do here is act as a citizen. So the most important thing you can do is talk to your MP and engage them on this issue. And if we'll be releasing a lot more information over the coming weeks at Environmental Defence that can kind of equip you with more information to go to your MP, but there is a lot of stuff online already on our website. So please, 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 if you can, call your MP or, you know, go to their office, just speak to your MP and talk about why this is an important issue. Because that's really what is going to get us across the finish line in terms of financial regulation, you know, particularly in the House. The second thing you can do is, as Julie mentioned, we have the Climate Aligned Finance Act currently in the Senate. So contacting senators and sharing your support for this piece of this legislation is absolutely key. So that's the second great thing you can do. They're two quite high effort things, but if you have the capacity, it would be amazing. Two slightly lower things you can do is you can sign up to our welcome series. So this gives you kind of an introduction on what is financial regulation, what is climate aligned finance, just goes a little bit deeper into some of the things we've touched on today. And it will also kind of pop you on our mailing list so that when new campaign points, when new petitions, new things come out, that you are ready to go. And finally, we have an existing letter on our website that you can sign, which sends a letter to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Deputy Prime Minister Minister Freeland, MP Blakey and MP Garon, and their two finance critics. So that's already had quite a few thousand hits, but the more the merrier. It's really important that we get as many people as possible kind of reaching out to their members of parliament. So if you can't talk to your MP directly, then please, we implore you to sign this letter here. So I think that pretty much takes us to the end. I will let Julie maybe have the last few words there.
Thanks, Alex. That was perfect. And I think one of the most important things you said was showing those tiers. If you really want to engage with politicians, so many options to do that. And we have support for you. If you are just a bit more curious on the subject, want to help show your support in a lighter touch way, definitely please keep in touch and feel free to sign up for our series of educational pieces about this, as well as the best thing about signing up for that is that we'll send you some of those easy actions that you can take where all you have to do is type in your name and postal code and we'll do the hard work of sending off essentially something that aligns with everything we've said today to your elected official. One key point on that, and in terms of, you know, why are we recommending that type of engagement? You know, we as professional climate advocates meet with members of government all the time, and we say, okay, we've done some research, we focus on this topic. Here's what we know is important for the financial system for climate action in Canada. And they'll say, okay, great, but at the end of the day, a political party needs to get votes as much as they're, you know, there for better purposes in many times. They also need to get elected. And they say, what do my constituents think about this? When we're able to point to the fact that, hey, you know, we're talking with so many parents and grandparents who care about this issue, who know it's important. Thousands of people have signed on to letters showing that these actions need to be taken. Then politicians recognize, okay, this is something that not only I should move on, but I can move on. So your engagement is frankly so important for making policy in Canada better on all fronts, and especially this one. to wrap up our presentation on climate finance policy, the bottom line here is that financial policy is important on its own, and it's also a key piece of climate policy. We really need to tell the government to get going on this and to fix what is frankly the largest gap in Canada's climate plan. And we see this as one of the most powerful things we can do to tackle climate change. So with that, I think we're great to move into questions, and thanks to all of you for tuning in and looking forward to our conversation.
All right, before we jump into questions, I just want to say thank you so much to Julie and to Alex for sharing your time, your experience and your wisdom with us, for empowering us. And, you know, for starting just at the basics and explaining how finance and climate are connected, how policy can be used to more effectively shape the economy, and affect our ability to meet those climate goals, and how the global financial system and Canada's terrible policies are preventing us from meeting our own promises for climate targets, from respecting the rights of all people, especially Indigenous people, who are often most impacted by some of the development that's happening here in Canada. And, you know, for ensuring stability in our future. That's what we want. I've been listening to people say that they want to switch from their banks to credit unions, for example, to find an institution that is more climate friendly. And as you've mentioned before, Julie, that means all of us running around to all of our banks, or, you know, our pension funds, if we're lucky to have one. So I found it really exciting to hear how implementing, you know, systemic policies are so much more effective. But we need to let the government know that that's what we want. And I love that emphasis that, you know, they're there to serve us. They want to know what we want. There's a vital and important role for each of us for continued learning with you, and the resources that you have at Environmental Defense. And then also all these things that will make it so much easier for us to write that letter, to reach out. So we will post these links on the For Our Grandchildren website. We will post the recording of this video. Someone's already asked us, I need to see this again. There's a lot of information. I mean, I've heard you speak on this 3 times now, and each time I have a deeper understanding. So we will post suggestions, a recording of this video, other resources from Environmental Defense, other resources that we also obtained from the Ottawa Gatineau group for our kids. So yes, we'll move into questions, but just thank you so much for your time and energy, Julie and Alex, and your expertise in coming to speak with us this evening. Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's really our pleasure.
So comments in the chat. Dara says, there's a great article from The Atlantic back in 2018, which was quite an eye-opener. So it's called, Am I Part of the Problem? The 9.9% is the new American aristocracy. So there's, I believe that's actually the link that I think that's from Patty McDonald. So you can check that out.
Yeah, there's a couple of comments on we need to get the electoral system changed so that we can have more of an effect on what's going on in policy, and there's a couple of comments here to that effect.
Shall we jump to hands and then we'll come back to this? We'll just alternate. So
yes.
Jeff and Wendy, we see your hands are up.
The question I had was about shareholder activist groups. Sometimes I know in the past with specific companies, shareholders have gotten together to push changes on various corporations. I know they don't always aren't successful, or they aren't successful, but even a small number of shareholders can apply pressure to corporations. I was just wondering if our speakers had any comment on that.
Thank you. Do you want to step in, Alex, or do you want me to take that one?
Maybe I'll throw in a sentence or two before you, Judy, which is to just reiterate that financial regulation is really the only thing we believe is going to shift this problem. You know, there have been lots of efforts, like you said before, to kind of engage with shareholders, and while it does things to benefit some institutions, financial regulation. You know, until we change the rules that the system which the system operates, we're not going to change on this issue. So if you're thinking like how to direct your personal efforts, I think acting as a citizen here and engaging with your elected officials is absolutely the best thing to do. But there are, of course, lots of ways that people are choosing to engage on this issue, and we do need efforts across the board. But I think financial regulation is really what's going to be the nail in the coffin here.
Thanks, Alex. Spot on. And Jeff, to add maybe a bit more color, in case folks aren't familiar on the call, what Jeff's getting at here with shareholder activism. When you own a stock of equity, so let's say you own equity in Apple or Google or whatever your tech of choice, there at the annual general meeting, you can vote on different parts of the company's policies. So a recent turn has been for individuals or institutional investors, like a bank or a pension fund, to vote on issues that relate to the institution's climate policies. So an activist shareholder on climate would, for example, if they own equity, if they own a share of Apple, will say, okay, you got to reduce your emissions faster. You should be doing more on climate. And that's kind of what Jeff's getting at as, you know, inquiring about whether that's a solution. There are some groups in Canada that do that. If you're interested to look into it more, one called Investors for Paris Compliance, another coalition of investors called Climate Engagement Canada. But what we've seen, and you know, not faulting those groups, but more the effort of shareholder activism, is that it doesn't really work. I think what those groups have done is kind of highlighted where companies are making or are not making progress. But the perfect example for why shareholder activism doesn't work is BP, which has been known as BP, Beyond Petroleum, British Petroleum, all different kinds of names. At the end of the day, they're an oil company. In many ways, because of shareholder activists, because of people who owned their stock and said, do better on climate, a couple of years back, they set relatively ambitious targets to say, we're going to cut our production of oil and gas because we want to be good on climate, and we know that's what you got to do. But then in 2023, they decided to not abide by that commitment anymore. So there was so much work from people who owned pieces of BP through their stocks saying, do better on climate, do better on climate. They had this huge victory with a commitment, but that isn't binding. So a couple of years later, last year, BP said, well, huge profits in oil, we're going to renege on that commitment and increase our production of oil. I shouldn't have, that was a curse. Never mind what it means for the climate. So shareholder activism, the point here is that there's no actual accountability, particularly not the type of democratic accountability that we have when we're working with government officials. So in short, I think it's been something that has been really tried and tested over the years, shareholder activism, trying to engage with a company that you own to do better on climate. And it's not working. Loads of data is starting to come out where people are kind of putting their tails between their legs and saying, okay, this isn't getting us where we thought it would, and we put a whole lot of sweat into it.
Alyssa has a question.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering if the Finance Act would have any impact on like institutional investors, like even like universities or other, or was it just be like banks and pension funds?
Yeah, so a trick in Canada is that it's like a whole jigsaw puzzle of different regulators. So the Climate Aligned Finance Act would affect any institutions that are regulated federally, because that's where the Senate can work. That's in the technical sense, but absolutely the Climate Aligned Finance Act would create sea waves for how any financial institution in Canada would work. By the signal alone, and then of course how things kind of percolate through the financial system. A university, a credit union who's regulated provincially, they're all going to see these policies moving forward if we're successful in doing our work and getting them to go through, and we'll have to take better climate action as a result.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, we'll turn things over to Catherine Langley next. Hi, Catherine.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are. We can hear you.
Okay, looking down the gallery, I think I would describe nearly everyone as progressive and believing in democracy. But I would also guess that most of us don't feel we are represented by our members in the House of Commons. Yesterday, I did tune in to Zoom for Fair Vote. And the time is now for electoral change, the National Citizens Assembly on Electoral Reform. It's Bill M86. It's supported by Greens, NDP, Bloc, some Liberals, even some Conservatives. But they need 170 members for it to pass. And they have to get another 70 before February 5th. So they've got a phone bank for progressives to try and apply pressure in ridings where there is a conservative or a liberal member of parliament. Now, this is our opportunity for systemic change so that we can move forward on things like climate aligned finance, on healthcare, on all the issues, housing that we are passionate about. But as long as we have no voice in Parliament, our chances of success are greatly limited. So now is the time to act on this. We've got 3 weeks, and then hopefully things such as Finance Aligned Act will go through. The same parties are pushing for the same policies, the Bloc, the Greens, the NDP, and some left-leaning Liberals. So if you can possibly help Fair Vote in the next 3 weeks, it's urgent, the time is now. We need systemic change. We need more democracy. We need to strengthen our democracy. This is not 1867, a two-party system. Did anybody on this call get the vote they voted for in the last federal election? I know I didn't, but anyhow, thank you.
Catherine, this is wonderful. Would you be able to send us a link that we could post on the For Our Grandchildren website, along with the recording and the other links connected to this presentation? That, I think it's really important to amplify.
Thank you. I appreciate the validation, and I also appreciate this evening.
Yeah, well, we all do. I think it's wonderful. Linda Sunderland has her hand up. Hi, Linda. You're on mute there.
Hi, yeah, I just unmuted myself. I was going to say that Paul Craig was at the advocacy meeting that we had last week, so he would probably be able to send us a link to the Fair Vote so we could send a lovely letter to Michelle Ferrari or whatever they recommend we do.
Okay.
I believe we have a meeting set up to meet with her. And I think that might be on January 22nd, but I'm not 100% certain about that. Jeff, do you know anything about this?
I do not know when a meeting or if a meeting has been set up with Michelle Ferrari. I did put a link in the chat to the information from Fair Vote Canada about the National Citizens Assembly and details on that. If you want to sign the petition, we have paper copies. You can contact myself. We're hopefully going to be at the markets this weekend and out in the streets, getting signatures. And as Catherine said, we're also pushing all the Fair Vote members within Peterborough to get more involved. And as she said, this is really critical for our democracy.
Perfect. Okay, we'll scavenge that out of our chat. We'll put things on our website, and people can follow up with that. Okay, so just looking at the chat, there's no other hands immediately, but you're welcome to put your hands up. So someone had a question about who are the 20 MPs who are calling for this action, and Alyssa gave a link to that. Then there's conversation about electoral reform. I think that we've covered with that from Catherine Langley. Yeah, apply pressure. Oh, Rita says a very sobering book to read to understand how we got to where we are is called The Big Myth by Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway, who co-wrote The Merchants of Doubt. Alyssa says, people in groups like the IFPC and Stand.Earth have brought shareholder resolutions to the RBC annual general meeting, but they haven't passed, unfortunately. So I think that goes back to what Julie was saying about that's not always the most effective place. We'll pause in the chat because I see David Morton has raised his hand.
Thank you. I will try to get through this without coughing too much. I've got COVID, unfortunately. But first, I just want to say I found the presentation fantastic. And I love the focus being on government policy, not individual banks or investors or anything, because we have tried, my wife and I have tried with our investors, and RBC goes, who cares? You know, even if we've got a relative amount of money there, they just don't care. The local investor does, or sorry, investment banker may do. So I think the strategy to aim governmentally is absolutely bang on. Doesn't mean we stop yelling at our investment advisors, but I think it's bang on. The other thing I'll say is there are tiny little victories you can get along the way. And I'm just going back 2 years ago when I was on the board at Trent University, and we started to ask questions about, well, those of us that have endowment funds with the university, don't we have a right to say where we want them to go? Because they had one fund, which went probably the same spot that RBC funds went. And so you can, by pressuring in groups you're in, get changes made, because we were able to set up, the university did set up what they call a ESC, I think, fund, which supposedly is more environmentally friendly than the others. And all I'm saying is you got to keep pressing at every level, but I think the focus of environmental defense is absolutely bang on. I wish we had an MP. I'm not going to say anything more. I'm just going to shut up or I'll probably be sued by a million people. So anyway, thank you for the presentation.
Ruffling feathers everywhere you go, David Morton. Okay.
Back to the chat for a moment. We've got from Janet, the question I have relates to the relation between inflation and fossil fuels. 25% of inflation was quoted, noting that fossil fuels are involved in the life cycle of the production of most daily products and services that we buy and use. So Janet's curious about the top strategy you would suggest to us to put into daily action, knowing that.
I'm happy
Wants to go,
to,
Alex?
yeah, I can touch on this to the best of my ability. Yeah, so I've added the link in the chat there, Janet, so you can have a look at the report yourself. But climate related inflation is a very big problem. It's going to affect so many parts of our cost of living. So from groceries, severe weather impacts affects food supply issues, which affects grocery prices, and energies. Like all of these impacts are just going to exacerbate unless we act on climate. So it feels like a cop-out answer to say, but I hope you don't see it as that the best way to act on climate related inflation is to promote climate policy that addresses climate change. So from our perspective, we think financial regulation is a big way to do that, but any action that can mitigate climate change is going to help in mitigating this. From an economic perspective, though, Julie touched on in her presentation about how climate change will have significant impacts on our economic system. So from the risk of stranded assets being a big one. Sorry, lost my train of thought. Stranded assets are going to be a big economic problem unless we move our investments away from fossil fuels and into solutions. And we experienced in the 2008 financial crash a whole series of economic problems when mortgages and home prices dropped in value drastically. So the same economic shockwaves could happen if we experience a high quantity of fossil fuel related stranded assets. So financial regulation is a good way to safeguard against that one particular economic impact of climate change. Yeah. And over to you, Julie. I'm sure you can add some things there as well.
No, that was super. And I often say this kind of regardless of the audience, if it's people or if we're talking to a financial institution, that the best way to reduce climate related financial impacts is to reduce climate change, because it's getting to the severity where you simply can't fight it unless we aim to prevent it.
Okay, good. Someone had asked, Sue asked if we could include the link to the environmental defense petition, and Julie has done that, so that's in the chat. And Alex has also added a link to the welcome series. Some of these links, at least, I've already posted to the website, for some of them at least. There's the welcome series. Jeff Daw has included the National Citizens Assembly link as well. You're looking for that. Patrick McCauley, you mentioned that public sector pension plans are heavily invested in anti-climate organization. What about the Canada Pension Plan? And again, Alex has put in a link there. I'm not sure if you wanted to say more about that, Alex, to the whole group.
Sorry, I lost my pointer on my many screens here. Yeah, just to reiterate, the Canada Pension Plan, yes, has an awful lot of investments. This is off the top of my head, so please don't quote this, but I think they have quoted to say at least 20 billion. Julie, if that is definitely the wrong figure, please jump in, but I think that is the one quoted in Shift Action. So a serious amounts of money, huge amounts of money. So yeah, they're one of the biggest pension plans in Canada. I recommended this. I sent this link to an organization called Shift Action, and they work specifically on pensions, and they give all these different pension plans a scorecard so that you can understand a little bit more about the kinds of climate policies that these different pension managers have and how they're moving. And so I would really recommend looking at Shift if you're particularly interested in pension plans.
Okay, question from well, actually, another link to fairvote.ca, if you'd like to follow that up on their website. Mark Bullock asks, can our presenters give us some idea of what regulation looks like, given that producing oil is not in itself unlawful? How can investments in producing a legal product be limited? Such a great question. I'm going to pass that over to Julie and Alex.
Sounds great. I'm wondering if this person was by any chance a lawyer at some point in their life?
A high school history teacher for, I don't know if Mark,
Right.
Mark, you can jump in. We'd love to hear from you.
No, that sounds great. And it's a super question. I always love a question that's asking for more detail on what a policy can look like. Our key recommendation is something that has been applied in countries across the world, or that people across the world are starting to talk about. And this is the idea of requiring transition plans from financial institutions. So essentially, yes, a financial institution employs people to make investment decisions. They're going to keep doing that. They're going to abide by the law and not much else. But if a company has to produce a transition plan, it means you set targets for reducing your greenhouse gas pollution or your emissions over the next 25 years, because 2050 is a really critical decade. Starting in 2025, which is now soon, but wasn't when we started to talk about this, and 2025 is another critical year. So you set targets for how much you're going to reduce your emissions, and then you have to report on your progress against that, and you have to report on your plan to deliver on it. So again, this is something that's really quite simple. Countries around the world are starting to recognize this language of organizations setting a climate transition plan, both companies and the financial institutions who invest in it. And again, super simple idea. If you think about, I don't know, it's New Year's. If you think about, okay, I'm going to get into swimming and I'm going to be faster this year than I was last year. It's a matter of, you set a target, you set a plan to deliver on that, and you see how you're doing against it, right? So when it comes to, as you mentioned, oil and gas production is not illegal, but it is the largest source of climate pollution. We have to look at broadly climate targets. We have global norms around what needs to happen, global scientific consensus around the markers for a credible plan that's aligned with a safe climate, which means, in fact, cutting emissions in half by 2030, down to essentially zero by 2050. And a financial institution can be required to report on their plan to do that. And if they don't, there can either be penalties with new laws, as well as perhaps a bit of a public outcry, as we're seeing individuals are also keen to engage with their financial institutions. So the headline of what we're recommending is transition plans and reporting on those required from all financial institutions.
That's a, yeah, great answer and a great question. I have a question myself. So we talked about stranded assets, and obviously the financial institutes themselves must be aware that there is a risk of having stranded assets. Is there not some amount of internal tension that they need to turn things around in order to prevent that, or how are they addressing that issue?
I can start, and then Alex, if you'd like to come in. That's such a great question. You would think the writing is on the wall and financial institutions would simply move in the right direction. So I'll say two things here. First, what Alex talked about, short-term profit over long-term gain. Some financial institutions think, okay, I can stay in here till the last minute. It's like how many investors will say, you know, I'll know when the stock's about to drop and I'm going to sell high. It's kind of that type of mentality about short-termism, as well as, frankly, not an entirely informed perspective on the devastation of climate change. You would be surprised and quite concerned about what many senior executives at financial institutions don't know about climate change and how much they underestimate its severity. That's why pieces like the Climate Aligned Finance Act, CAFA, are so important, because it would require climate expertise in directors and members of the board. Because right now, literacy on this issue is so low. I won't go into examples because it would sound like I'm making fun of people, even though I'm just recounting stories. And then the other piece is that the market, you know, again, going back to that short-term profit over long-term gain, the market is skewed right now. The Canadian government still subsidizes fossil fuels, which means the government pays in and then it ends up being more profitable for the investor on tax dollars. So, you know, we need to shift those subsidies out of fossil fuels and into clean investments, because the market is skewed where fossil fuels are profitable in the short term, partially because of some of that price inflation that Alex talked about, and also because the market is tilted by the government subsidizing products that they shouldn't be.
Yes. Yeah, it reminds me of in the olden days when they were harvesting whales and they knew that they were hunting them to extinction. It still made sense for them to hunt as, in fact, it probably increased as the population declined. It was like, oh, we need to get as many of these as possible before the market disappears. And it sounds much the same.
I'm thinking about your comment, Julie, about the lack of climate literacy of directors. You know, because before you said that, you know, my thought is, how can somebody watch what's happening? Some, you know, maybe they're rich and they can protect themselves and their family from the worst of, you know, the impacts of climate change. Maybe they have no like moral fiber. Like I can't understand how people can continue to invest in fossil fuels when it's so clearly obvious. But your comment about the lack of climate literacy is really important. And, you know, as we're making connections on this call to Fair Vote Canada and changing the way we're voting and who we're electing, but it's another huge piece of the puzzle. And I wonder if you folks have anything to say about this. Is just education. You know, like I'm a retired high school teacher. There wasn't a lot, Scott as well, there wasn't a lot about climate, about environment. There was a couple little sections in the grade 10 science course. There was a whole course on environmental studies, but that was an elective. I would like to see, you know, climate literacy, environmental literacy embedded in every single stream of all the curriculum. So what, from your vantage point, or are you seeing movements to increase the level of climate literacy?
Maybe I'll pass it to Alex, but I'll just agree with you quickly that even when I went to school, and I'm only like a few years older than Alex, but even when I went to school, I had to design my own program so that I could learn about environment and climate change. It wasn't something that was easily accessible. So that's starting to shift. Certainly we in the environmental movement make a conscious effort to educate and share information, but I'll pass it to you to talk more about that, Alex.
Absolutely. Yeah. Literacy is such an important part of all of this, both climate literacy and financial literacy, I think. In terms of, shifting, are we moving towards a place where young people are being educated on climate change? I think absolutely. I think there have been a number of moves in educational establishments and laws to add climate change to school curricula. So that's a really positive move. And of course, the internet is an incredible wealth for young people, an incredible resource for young people to kind of find their own information. And I think that's evidenced by movements like Fridays for Future, where huge numbers of young people are understanding to a really high level the issue of climate change and showing up on the streets in reflection of that. So while climate literacy, I think, is improving, I think financial literacy, which is the other side of the coin of understanding this, I think financial literacy still lags behind quite extensively. For example, a lot of people don't understand kind of financial terminology such as debt financing or equity, and we need to do a lot of work collectively to help people understand these financial concepts so that they can in turn understand how this relates to climate change. Just like Julie has demonstrated today, Julie's given you a wonderful introduction of, financial and climate literacy in conjunction. I will say at Environmental Defence, we are very soon releasing a series of blogs and videos to help kind of bring people up to speed on financial literacy so that they can understand this climate change issue. So I would definitely recommend signing up to our welcome series. Shameless plug there, of course, if you are interested, because literacy is such a huge part of this issue.
Yeah, well, I'm so happy to hear about that welcome series. Such a great opportunity to be connected with folks who are working in this field every day.
We do have one more question here from Janet. She's curious about where we might find information about the percent of fossil fuels in the life cycle of products and services available for use. Is there any country with policies that incentivize? No wonder I couldn't. Okay. Incentivize the citizens' reduction in consumption of products where fossil fuels are integrated, namely making choices to purchase and use the products with lower levels of fossil fuels in their life cycles versus those with high levels.
What a cool idea. I've never heard of that. Thank you, Janet.
Yeah, thanks, Janet. So maybe two parts to this question. Where can we find information about the percent of fossil fuels in the life cycle of a product? I don't know if that's tracked, but you can, gauge if it's plastic, synthetic, polyester. Those are all longer words for fossil fuels. But in terms of your second question, is there any country with policies that incentivize citizen reductions in consumption of products with fossil fuels? Yeah, Canada has a price on pollution. So the carbon tax, which has not been so fondly received in the media, does exactly this. In the media recently, I should say. It is a pretty cool policy where, it's designed to give money back to citizens so that most people below a certain income threshold end up with more money at the end of the day, but that their product choices are shifted towards those which have a lower emissions footprint. And the way that works isn't, someone in the government calculating the percent of fossil fuels in a product and setting a price on it, but kind of through the whole scheme of the economy where the producer is charged a price for the pollution that they're putting out in the atmosphere. And then that kind of percolates through the cycle so that, for example, a product with a higher carbon footprint would be higher priced because of a price on pollution working well throughout the economy. That's of course a very simplified summary of a price on pollution, but that's a kind of essentially what it ends up doing at the end of the day.
I'll just add, thank you for that, Julie, and I'll just add to that. Last month at our 4RGMeets, we had a book review of several climate change related books. And one of them that Jeff Daw presented was the carbon footprint of everything. I think that's the title, correct me if I'm wrong. And so that might answer part of the question now that you have in terms of
Right.
how much fossil fuel is in various products. Yeah, so that's someplace you can go for that.
I just wrote the carbon footprint of
Everything?
everything.
I think that's the
Jeff, you
title.
can go
Jeff, jump in there if
correct
we've
me
got that wrong.
We need.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
he's-
that's correct. That's
Yeah.
correct. And the carbon tax is also very, right on about incentivizing people.
And Jeff gave a fabulous summary of that book last month as well. So if you don't have time to read it, but you want to get the highlights, just pop back to the For Our Grandchildren website under the 4RGMeets tab, and we have all of our presentations uploaded there.
And I think unless there's a hand up
There's
there. Yep,
Richard.
Richard Peachy.
Hi, Richard.
Hi. Yeah, I have a question about what do we do in situations where the market cannot affect oil production, like Russia, Saudi Arabia, United Empire, UAE. This production affects the market in a negative way. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Do you have any thoughts, Alex, or should I jump in?
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Richard. I think that's such an important point to recognize the role of OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or countries who kind of have state-owned, non-private fossil fuel companies. I mean, what climate experts and energy experts often say about reducing fossil fuels is that we need to cut with both ends of the scissors, right? So that's supply and demand of fossil fuels, the production and then our consumption and use of them. Which is why we need policies like shifting to heat pumps instead of gas heating, shifting to electric vehicles, electrifying the grid so that demand globally for fossil fuels goes down. So that ideally Canada stops producing fossil fuels, so do other countries that are accountable and amenable to doing that. And then countries, for example, like Russia or many in the Gulf states, which have demonstrated a lack of willingness to stop production, see demand globally drying up for their product. With climate policies that have been committed, we do expect, and the further that we expect to see, we do expect to see demand for oil and gas shrinking. So then, for example, the value of Russia producing, or another country producing oil or gas on, in a non-market reduces. I mean, we even saw that during or kind of following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, where a lot of European countries, in fact, increased their use of renewable energy so that they would lower their demand for the gas which they previously purchased from Russia. So that's a geopolitical example that had energy implications, where we see, both the demand and supply side being super important to move our energy systems in the direction they need to go.
So I think that wraps it up for us this evening. And I really want to thank Julie and Alex for joining us and helping us out today. And a great deal of excellent information there, and resources and links and ways to take action. And that's what it's all about, I think. And so with that, I will bid you all good night and thank you all for coming out to join us, and hope you have a pleasant evening.
Thanks, everyone. So lovely to chat with you tonight.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.